All right. Hello there, everybody. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and I am your host, kind of per usual around here. Thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate the heck out of it. On the agenda tonight, what do we got? Well, whenever you're listening to it. I say tonight because that's when I'm recording. Let's see. We have last night, UFC 317. International Fight Week. Boy, was that necessary. The way that card played out, man, MMA, we'll talk about it when we get there, but there's been a lot of complaints, some from me, some from others, almost all of them justified, about, the momentum of the UFC, stuff like that. Sort of their business policies and whatnot, and it's been a surprisingly long time since you just kind of had one of those nights that reminded you what's so great about all this. Uh, and we finally got one of those. So we'll be talking about that. We will preview another. Man, you go from the high. How do we go from the high of UFC 317 to next week, Derek Lewis and Taliesin Teixeira in a main event? I mean, that's not a good card. So we'll preview that. Then we'll talk a few bits of news. Yeah, not a lot of news. I expected more, if I'm going to be honest. They usually do a bit more around International Fight Week, but there wasn't a whole lot of news. So I don't know what to tell you about that, but we will get into it when the time comes around. So anything you can do to help the podcast is always appreciated. Like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review. Y'all know the drill. Wait a minute. That's not next week. That's in 2 weeks, isn't it? It's July 12th. Wow, I almost, yeah, so we're just reviewing. Okay. My mistake, everybody. I forgot that was, we were taking yeah, because next Saturday's like the day after the 4th, right? Yeah, Friday's the 4th of July. I'll be stuck covering SmackDown on the 4th of July. Ugh. Because you know WWE's not going to take it off. That's annoying. That is profoundly annoying. See, I would tolerate, the UFC doesn't, but hypothetically I would tolerate that. 'Cause I'm at least interested. Ugh. At least SmackDown's going back to 2 hours. Alright, anyway, sorry. That's something I probably should have done. I said it last week. How did I forget? I got caught up in trying to dunk on Lewis and Teixeira as the main event. That's what it was. I got caught up in the hype of getting to point and laugh at that. Which, don't get me wrong, I still will when it comes around, but we will preview it next week instead of this week. Okay. Sorry for that there. I got that a little bit backwards. So, like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review, whatever's applicable to your podcast platform of choice. And the fact that I leave in all of my errors like that, I hope that curries at least a little bit of favor with how you think about this stuff. All right, that's longer intro than usual. Let's jump into this, shall we? UFC 317. How did the predictions go? 9-2. I did swap Rodriguez and Hermanson. Two very specific reasons. One, the age difference. I kind of forget how young Gregory Rodriguez is because his face just looks. That man looks old. He looks older than I do. And he's significantly younger. And the reason for Jack Hermanson's long layoff this time, which was north of a year, was shoulder surgery related. And I've got a real. This is not a one-to-one, but I am very inclined to not pick fighters coming off of shoulder surgery. It's a tricky business repairing the shoulder, and you rarely get it right. You rarely like keep everything because it's a very complicated joint. So that was enough to get me to change my opinion on that one, and of course that played out. We also lost it was supposed to be Cedricus Dumas against McVeigh. Then they couldn't get Dumas in front of a judge to plead for his ankle monitor to be taken off so he could travel because he got arrested again for, was it escaping custody this time? I don't know, something. Still on the roster. We can't have Francis Ngannou because Dana White doesn't like him. But Cedricus Dumas, who's like escaping police custody, and on multiple run-ins with the law. Yeah, he's fine and dandy. Not going to go into it. So they got a replacement fighter. Sorry. Missed my mute button there. So they got a replacement fighter, Christopher Ewart. Now, this happened during fight week. Okay? I previewed this and Dumas was still on the card. Now, poor Mr. Ewart signed for a middleweight fight on a few days' notice. Apparently had to try and cut north of 30 pounds. And couldn't do it. I don't know who told him this was a good idea, but it wasn't, because then the UFC said, okay, no, you're cut, you're fired. And McVeigh made weight and they paid him. So, you know what? At least they did that. I mean, I'm sure the 10 grand they paid, Jackson McVeigh really hurt their bottom line. Or do they give him win as well? Either way, it's peanuts. Ugh. Whole other thing. But just real briefly, because Daniel Cormier sort of, he got yelled at for this a little bit ago. But on one of the actual broadcasts, he said, yeah, the only way to get into the UFC these days is like the Contender Series, tough, or a short notice thing. And look, they don't like saying that part out loud because it reveals the monopsonistic state of things a little bit too loudly. But he's right. Not an inaccurate observation. Here's the thing about taking a short notice fight to get into the UFC. It is your introduction to everyone involved with the UFC, and first impressions matter. If your manager calls you and says, hey, I got you a UFC fight on 5 days' notice, at 185, excuse me, not 135, at 185, and you step on the scale, first, don't accept. Step on the scale first, please. If you step on the scale and that sucker reads 215 to 220, you don't accept that fight. Because you will not get another shot at a first impression. If you cannot make the weight on the timetable, on the short notice timetable, don't do it. It is genuinely better. It is genuinely more in your interest to say, I can't make weight on that. Be upfront about it. I can't make that weight on that time scale. If you if you're it, like if you're the last guy they can call, they might call the other guy and go, okay, we've got somebody. How do you feel about a catch weight? How do you feel about doing it a light heavyweight? Something like that. But don't say, if you say, I'll show up and I'll make 185, and then you can't, and you don't, badly, they're just going to get real pissed at you for messing up their plans. Even though it's a plan for a prelim fight, then you're having to be called in on short notice to fix their screw-up about having a felon. A guy facing immediate legal action for escaping custody on roster and saying, hey, that's a fight we can make. Idiots. All around idiots. But I'm using, again, Christopher Ewart here as an example for anyone. Getting into the UFC on short notice is one of the only avenues in anymore. That's very, very true. But be smart. Don't let your manager bully you into it. And if you're a coach, by the way, his coaches should not have. He should have told him this was a bad idea. Should have told him up front, don't do it. You can't cut 30 plus pounds in 4 days. That's insane. So anyway, that didn't happen. What did we get wrong here? There was only one underdog. I think Talbot was the only underdog that won all night. Yeah, because Van closed as a slight favorite, which surprised me. But then he did what he did, so I got that one wrong. And as I mentioned, I kind of look. Lima still has a fair amount of like upside. We'll get to some of the fight in particular, but there were a couple of things about his game that were made readily apparent in this bout. And it's not that those aren't things he can fix. He's young, so's Talbot. Fine with young developing fighters have issues to work through. Oh no. Just be cognizant of that. But I maybe should have given Talbot a little more credit here, mostly because like Lima's not in a position to. He doesn't have the wrestling chops of Harney Barcelos. Anyway, so I got those two wrong. 9 and 2. Would have liked to have gotten to 10 on this card because this means my year to date to 199, 63 and 1 with one no contest. One off at the 200 mark, and that bothers me just a bit. Just a little bit. Mostly because I'm weird about stuff like that, but I'm okay with that. And once again, if you just picked straight favorites, you had a good night. You had a real good night. All right, as for the fights themselves, and what I imagine will take up a giant chunk of the podcast tonight, certainly maybe the lion's share once all said and done, just about this fight. Ilia Touria becomes the new UFC lightweight champion. He knocks out Charles Oliveira cold 2 minutes and 27 seconds into the first round. Ay, ay, ay. Man, what can you almost say about this? I said before, and a lot of people have kind of got in line with this. Ilia Touria now has maybe the best 3-fight stretch in UFC history. Maybe all of MMA. And I'm happy. There's a few bits in Pride that might give it a run for its money. There's a couple of caveats that need to go into that. So if we start looking at some of like the big Pride runs, guys like Vanderlei, Fedor, they usually have like 2 really good ones in a row, and then there's a weird one. Not always scrubby, I'm not accusing, but just weird. Like Fedor had a bunch of those where it'd be like, boy, I beat 2 really good guys in a row. I mean, his best 3-fight stretch in Pride was probably his debut when he beat Semi Schultz, but Semi in MMA never quite achieved the way he did in kickboxing. Then he just beat Heath Herring really impressively, and then he beat Nogueira. Like that's really impressive. In fact, let me bring up Fedor real fast. I want to make sure I'm not forgetting a fight in there. Because yeah, but then unfortunately right after that he went to Rings, Lithuania and beat a nobody. Then he comes back and he has the weird fight with Fujita. I mean, he wins, but he gets rocked in that pretty badly. Then recovers and because he's Fedor. After he wins the belt. Then he beats Fujita and Gary Goodridge. And then Yuji Nagata. And I mean, I respect Nagata as a judoka, but that was in no, that was Ogawa who was Yuji Nagata was the wrestler. Yeah, because that was that one got him in hot water with Pride, actually, because that was their New Year's Eve card for Inoki Bomayi. And Pride wasn't too thrilled with that. Then he comes back and he beats Mark Coleman and Kevin Randleman and Ogawa. Then he has the no contest with Nogueira. Then he beats Nogueira. But then he fights Yoshioki Koshaka, which was an avenge. He avenged like the only loss in his career, but even that nobody really considered that a loss. It was so weird. And he falls, but that's weird. Then he beats Crow Cop in one of the best heavyweight fights ever. Then like, oh, Zuluzinho. What are we doing here? So you get like these really nice stretches of two, but you never quite get three solid ones in a row. See, Crow Cop had a couple of good stretches. Like his run through the Pride heavyweight tournament was real nice. Yeah, if the problem with that one is like the first two fights he won in that were against Minoa, better known as Minoa Man, and then Hidehiko Yoshida. Now, Yoshida, Olympic gold medalist in judo, much respect, but he was not a big deal in MMA. But, the same night he knocks out Vanderlei and Josh Barnett. Like, that's real good. Real good stretches earlier. Okay, you could maybe get here with these three. When he knocks out Alexander Emelianenko, the Barnett win was weird, though, the shoulder injury. Then he submits Kevin Randleman. Like, but you kind of see the point here, right? I think the closest you've got, and I said this last week, you get John Jones. Because there's a stretch of time for John that is maybe which year was it? His 2011 is maybe the best calendar year ever. So February of 11, he chokes out Ryan Bader with ease. Like a month later, he fights Shogun for the title and butchers him. Then he beats Quentin Rampage Jackson fairly easily with a rear naked choke. Then he chokes out Lyoto Machida in 2 rounds. Then he beats Rashad Evans. Okay, the Evans fight takes place April of 2012. But if you look at starting with his title winning effort, so March 19th of 2011 to April 21st of 2012. That is an insane stretch, and people try to downgrade this because they don't like John. These are old guys, and half of them were middleweights, and no, stop it. Shogun was the deserving champion. Stop that. I know he wasn't quite what he used to be, but pretending that he was the broken down version of himself that he became, he was not that in 2011. He wasn't quite the athletic dynamo he was earlier in his career, but he'd figured out who he was at that point. And Rampage was on a good stretch. Machida's a former champion. But he and Evans went on to fight at middleweight later. So what? I'm serious about that. So what? They were both former champions. You have to play this stupid game where you pretend everything sucks. Because you don't want to have an honest conversation about John's talent because you don't like him. Fine, don't like him. Say all the mean things you want to about him as a person, and you want to say that his heavyweight title, his time at heavyweight was like a disaster. I completely agree. I'm not going to say a whole lot of nice things about his time at heavyweight, but I'm not doing revisionism here. Okay, I'm just not. I was there for all of this. Watched it, covered it. I was there. Not doing revisionism. Not a fan of it. That may be like the best stretch. The only thing that Touria has over that is that he went up in weight to do it. But yeah, like, dude, Shogun was pound for pound ranked at the time. Machida might still have been. Like, these guys were still real close to their prime. They're all former champions. Nowadays, people only know Rampage as being fat. If you missed Rampage Jackson in his prime, even like to his UFC title or his time in the UFC, you missed out, man. He was He was something. Go back and watch his stuff. Seriously, do yourself a favor. Because if all you know about him is the memes and the fat, disappointing, unmotivated guy he was in Bellator and whatnot, then you never actually saw Rampage. Watch his stuff in Pride. Watch his stuff in the UFC, his early time in the UFC, his title-winning efforts. Like, watch that stuff. He was real good. His success was in no way accidental. But now you've got Topuria in 3 successive fights, knocking out Alexander Volkanovski, the first guy to knock out Max Holloway ever, and now first guy to stop Charles Oliveira with strikes since Paul Felder did it. I mean, because Oliveira had the TKO loss in 17. Then he went on his big epic run to the belt before losing to Makhachev in 2020. And even then, that was a tap out. I mean, he'd been stopped by strikes before. Why is this still listed as an esophagus injury here? It was a neck injury. Whatever. I might edit this at some point, but I don't feel like it right now. But the last guy who actually straight up knocked him out was Cub Swanson in 2012. I remember that fight, actually. Man, Charles Oliveira, let's take a second. I'll get to Topuria. I just want to give Oliveira some props here as a career note. I'm not trying to retire the guy or anything, but his UFC debut was in August of 2010. He's coming up on 15 years in the UFC. That's insane. And he debuted, got a nice armbar over Darren Elkins. He had a big upset over Efrain Escudero. I remember that. Escudero was kind of like, hey, he won the Ultimate Fighter when that sort of meant something. It didn't even really in 2010, but sort of. And it was like, yeah, he's going to be a thing. And then, no, Oliveira beats him and chokes him out. From backpack position. That wasn't even on the ground, if memory serves. Then, bizarrely, he gets knee-barred by Jim Miller. That's one of my favorite Jim Miller moments, by the way, and I got a lot of those. He gets TKO'd by Donald Cerrone. He goes to featherweight. He wastes a bunch of time there, misses weight a bunch of times. I started calling him Fat Charles Oliveira because he missed weight so much. He missed weight 4 times at featherweight. I mean, for crying out loud, he weighed... When he lost to Ricardo Lamas guillotined him, by the way. He weighed 155 for that. He literally weighed at the limit for the weight class above. Missed weight when he fought Miles Jury. He weighed 150 for that. Yet when he came back to lightweight in 2017, there was a bunch of baggage. Then he wins his return to lightweight. He beats Will Brooks. Then Paul Felder elbows him into the mat from guard. And then, he finally, everything clicks for Oliveira, and he just goes on that epic run. He finishes Chandler, Poirier, and Gaethje in successive fights, among others. This big run. And then, unfortunately, Makhachev got him. You could argue he should have won the Saryukian fight. I scored it for Arman, but it's not like he didn't have moments. But again, first time he's been knocked out. First time stopped with strikes since Felder did it. First time actually unconscious since Cub Swanson. Yeesh. But let's talk about Topuria. I'm trying to figure out the negativity around him. Because it's some of it I understand. Some of it is this guy is real good. He's not afraid to say it, which will rub a segment of the fandom the wrong way. Not my favorite thing that there's, but, doesn't bother me that much. Some of it I don't care for, but, there's a lot of personality and behavioral traits in the sport that I don't care for, and this is one of them. But he doesn't strike me as being like out of line, out of step with other fighters. Um, he's knocking out a lot of favorite fighters. Like by the time he fought Volkanovski, Volkanovski had finally kind of got his flowers from the fan base. There's a lot of reticence around Volk. He was real good for a long time before the fans kind of got around to really liking him. And then here comes Topuria and just knocks him out. Then he knocks out Max Holloway. And everybody loves Max. What's not to love about Max Holloway? Now Charles Oliveira, this guy who was like a shining beacon at lightweight, especially after Khabib left, to kind of like carry the torch and just do nothing but exciting fights. Offensive dynamo. And Topuria, again, flatlines him. So some of it's going to be that. I get it. That's a rough thing to do, to beat everyone's favorite fighter. That's rough. Volk struggled with that because he beat Aldo. He blanked Aldo. In a 3-round fight, completely blanked him. Then he beats, Max 3 times. And in the middle of that, he also stops the Korean Zombie. What's with the Zombie? And people like him. So it can be hard. It can be really hard to be the guy who's taken out everyone's favorite fighter. But there's still a bunch of guys now doing okay, let's diminish everything Topuria accomplished. So Volkanovski, he had too quick of a turnaround after that Makhachev knockout loss. Not saying it was an advisably quick turnaround, but I don't think it played that big a role. And, he beat Max. Well, Max had bulked up to 155 for that fight with Gaethje, and then he cut back down to 145, so he clearly wasn't the best version of himself. That's a load of crap. That was probably one of the harder cuts of Max's career, but you didn't see him complaining about it. And now it's like, it's Charles Oliveira. He's 36, and he's just washed. Why are we doing this? Why is there a segment of the fandom that is like this? There's something about Topuria in particular, and this is a big deal. This is what I've been thinking about this one, because I've been trying to figure out, where does all this reticence come from? Like, what's going on here? Why are we not getting behind this guy? And I'm not. How do I say this? I'm not saying you have to be a fan. I'm really not. Who you choose to cheer for in this sport or any sport is your business. Some of them we make fun of on occasion because, of course you can, and it's kind of fun, but most of it's meant in good humor. And you kind of just accept that you're a fan of X franchise. Well, here's some of the jokes about you, and we accept that. I mean, there's that whole column every year, the series of columns about why your team sucks before the NFL season. I don't know how easy those are to access anymore, but in theory they still exist. And you kind of just have to accept, like, there's funny stuff about us, and we can be made fun of. We can have a sense of humor about it. But again, who you cheer for is your business. You want it to be geography. You want it to be a moment of personal enjoyment you got out of something. Like, whatever. I don't care. I genuinely, when I say I don't care, I don't mean that it doesn't matter. I mean it is immaterial to the point being made. If you don't wish to cheer for Ilia Touria, fine. Whatever reason. But should we not be like getting behind someone trying to do this stuff? That doesn't mean rah, you can do no wrong, hero worship. But like, let's be vocal, be excited. He's bringing some life into this. This is all-time great stuff he's doing. I'll talk about the fight in a minute, I promise. So I spent some time trying to figure out, like, other guys start, make a run, and there's segments that get behind them, and why haven't we quite seen that with Ilia Touria? Like, what's been the issue? And I think I figured it out, or at least part of it. Because as we approached this, a lot of these comparisons started cropping up. I think a part of the reason where a lot of the fan base is really kind of leery of Topuria is there's a lot of comparisons being made to Conor McGregor. Now, there's a giant chunk of the current fan base that didn't see Conor's rise. Have to understand this. A lot of the guys who came along for the Conor ride, they're gone. They left, and they left in 2021, give or take, when all the COVID era fans came in. To COVID era fans, Conor McGregor borders on poison. He is nothing but bad news, bad publicity, bad headlines. He's nothing but a headache to them. They don't remember. They weren't here. Can't say they don't remember, because to remember implies that you forgot. They weren't here when he was lightning, when he was Mystic Mac, energizing the sport. Because he did. I know, I was here. Was never a big fan of the guy, but I remember what that was like. I do. But if you never saw the benefit, the good side of Conor, if all you know is the sexual assault stuff and assaulting people in bars and headaches and the ugliness, even most of these people didn't even really see him fight Khabib. And MMA does a piss poor job of explaining and ushering in history to newer fans. They had like several old school UFC fighters at this event last night at UFC 317. They usually do for International Fight Week. Because they have the current crop. Kayla was there. They showed her and Amanda Nunes. But they always try to show a couple of legends. They showed Matt Hughes no pop. I do not like Matt Hughes. I really don't. There's a lot of reasons for that. But to pretend he wasn't an extraordinarily important figure in UFC history is ridiculous. To pretend there wasn't a period of time when he was one of the best fighters in the world is ridiculous. He was. No pop because nobody knows who he is to recognize him. They showed Chuck Liddell. He got a medium pop. Because Chuck Liddell, as a figure, sort of penetrated the cultural zeitgeist a little bit. But I would bet money most of the people watching never watched a Chuck Liddell fight. Like, that's where we are with this stuff. And Conor, point being, if we're seeing the comparisons between Ilia Touria and Conor McGregor, and you're a newer-ish fan, even if you were here for the rise of Conor and for all the good stuff, there's a decent chance that you've reached a point where you are just like embittered by all of what he's become and all of what he's done. So any comparison to Conor is negative. And the more we talk, the more the comparisons got made, I think some of that just kind of permeated the attitude towards Ilia Touria. Now, and I'm not even saying there's zero comparisons to be made. Here's what people have been doing. Okay, he's European. Europe's a pretty big place, but Conor's Irish and Toupuria's Georgian/Spanish, but European. Energized the local fan base. Conor was a big deal in Ireland before he ever got to the UFC, and Touria has kind of got Spain on his back. He's hanging out with Real Madrid players, and he's a big deal. He's got the country there. Okay, that's a point of comparison. They've got similar ink. They've both got a caduceus on their back and a prominent chest piece. Conor's is that like sort of American traditional gorilla, whereas Touria's is all black and gray and different designs, but you can see the similarities. Both claimed featherweight gold. Both moved up to lightweight and claimed gold. Both were 28 years and 4 months old when they did it, when they got the second belt. My point is, I'm not even saying that some of these comparisons aren't being made even necessarily in like good faith. Like I don't think there's a bunch of people trying to poison the well for Topuria. I think it's sort of an unintended consequence of Conor being Conor more than anything else. And that's a shame because Topuria's done a few things that Conor never did. Actually defended a belt. I mean, it would be a big one. But I feel like some of that has kind of seeped into the perception and the attitude towards Topuria. I may be off on that. I'm not going to die on that hill, but I've been trying to figure it out. And look, there's a handful of things that Topuria's done that have kind of been like roll your eyes, groan inducing. Changing his nickname and then changing it back, and holding a press conference every other week in Spain. That strikes me as unnecessary. Like congratulating himself on Instagram the way he did that one time, like that's pretty eye-rolling, right? But those are relatively minor things, all things considered. When you've got anti-Semites and racists and all manner of bizarre beliefs that are celebrated in MMA. I mean, Bryce Mitchell can say, I think Hitler was a good dude and would have liked to have gone fishing with him, and then get cheered vociferously. But we're all bothered that Topuria is extraordinarily self-confident. The MMA fan base is warped in so many ways. Not just in the United States either. I mean, warped. But point being, I do think the Conor comparisons have sort of colored some of this. And I don't think there's anything that can be done about that. I think if you are conscious of that, you have to get over it. Get off the chair. Because they're not the same person. And being bitter at Topuria because you really don't like Conor for understandable reasons even is just weird. And I genuinely don't even think most people kind of realize that. But I've been trying to figure that one out. What's the holdup here? What's the segment of the fandom that is just pushing against this guy? He's not benefiting from bizarre preferential treatment. I mean, he hasn't had anything even approximating a gimme. His run up to fighting for the belt was full of difficult fights. Conor was kept away from a few people who would have given him real problems at that point in time at featherweight. He was kept way away from Frankie Edgar. And Frankie Edgar at that point in time would have given him all kinds of problems. And that never happened for Topuria. You know, when he got there, he earned it. And then he took the belt decisively. And he defended it decisively. I mean, we're pretending that the notion that the loss that Volkanovski suffered to Makhachev on that quick turnaround meant that anyone could have beaten him that night is comical. 'Cause that's kind of what's being implied when you say that that's why Topuria won. That you could have subbed out Topuria with Diego Lopez, and Diego Lopez would have won the belt that night, or Movsar Evloev, or anyone. That's sort of the implication, and that's ridiculous. I think that turnaround might have been a bit inadvisable for Volk, but I think even on his best day, Topuria probably still beats him. But I feel like the Conor stuff is sort of pinging in a way for a lot of the fan base that they don't want to go through that again. And if you were around, you don't want to go through it again. If you're new, and all you know is Conor as a headache at best, then you're looking at Topuria going, no, let's not wind up having another headache. So it's my best guess there. I think that's a little bit what's going on. Because by all rights, Topuria should be a very celebrated figure at this point. You know, we should kind of start getting on the band. You should get on the bandwagon if you're not already. Like, he's doing generational, all-time great stuff. I don't know how much. I expect him to do it for a little bit longer. You know, he's young. He's not even 30. But for some reason, segment of the fandom just... Some of it also, I think, another component to this. All the Islam Makhachev fans who are just like got their backs up at the implication that Makhachev's avoiding this fight. I think Makhachev's mostly avoiding the weight cut to 155. But man, I don't know how a fight with him and Topuria goes. Look, Makhachev's grappling and wrestling is really, really strong. His striking, for a while, his striking purely technically on its own merits was pretty solid. It's kind of, people have started to figure out a chunk of it now. You know, Volkanovski showed some avenues to beat him on the feet when they fought. And people have started to kind of take that to heart a little bit. And anyway, so there's a lot of those guys who, there's this weird inferiority complex that Makhachev fans have, or segment of them anyway. Like, dude was the lightweight champion, the most successful lightweight champion in UFC history. He's moving up to welterweight. Why do you care what? Stop behaving like small children. Eesh. But I think there's a little bit of that going on there too. I don't know. That's just me trying to put a few pieces together. Maybe I'm completely wrong. It's entirely possible. As for the fight itself, man. I've said this about Topuria before. I'm going to say it again here because it's still true. What makes Topuria so devastating is not just his punching power. Don't get me wrong. He is pound for pound among the most destructive punchers in the sport. But that is exacerbated significantly by his exceptional delivery system. You can have all the power in the world in your hand. If you can't hit anything, you might as well have the same punching power as an infant. It doesn't matter how hard your punch is if it never lands. That's the same way that it doesn't matter if someone misses you by a quarter of an inch or misses you by a foot. Some of the stuff is a purely binary function. Either contact is made or contact is not. And either you can land or you can't. And if you can't, then the amount of force you would have delivered or could have delivered does not matter one single iota. Ilia Touria doesn't just hit really, really hard. He does. But he is among the best in the sport at getting the weapon to the target. His accuracy in this fight in particular was like 70%, I think. Some really high number. That's his... If he's got a superpower, it's not just the raw force. It's the delivery system. It's the footwork. It's the shot selection. That's what makes him so devastating. Not just that he hits really hard. That is a tremendous benefit. But even if he hit 30% softer than he does, his delivery system is so good he would still be finishing people. The fact that he can put your lights out with a single punch this is why the delivery system matters. Because it harmonizes in such a way that he ends people. Charles Oliveira's defense was always a question mark here. The problem that he runs into is, well, let me rewind just a hair. Charles Oliveira gets hit and he gets kind of hurt a lot. It's a regular feature of his fights. Dustin Poirier wobbled him, Justin Gaethje wobbled him, Michael Chandler got to him. It's not impossible to find the guy's chin. But where earlier in his career Oliveira used to fall apart under physical pressure and adversity, he figured out how to kind of work around it. His bearing and his recovery got a lot better. So when he got wobbled by Poirier, he sorted it out. The fact that everyone was afraid of his guard helped. And I've talked about that before. Like, his guard's good. Certainly not saying it's otherwise, but it's not for a UFC championship level fighter. His guard should be respected, but it should not be like reinventing the standing 8 count, which is kind of what he did to Poirier and Gaethje. He got hit, he went down, was like, okay, come on down and play. And they were like, no, get up. He was like, no, I'm going to sit here for a minute or two. And the referee then said, okay, get up. And he went, fine, I'll get up. But all that, again, it kind of reinvents the standing 8 count if you're in boxing. And it gives him time to recover. So he figured out ways around it. And this guy has taken shots. I mentioned, he got hit by, Paul Felder took a barrage of elbows to finally put him down. But he's fought destructive punchers before. Gaethje's a destructive puncher. Poirier can thump. Michael Chandler's got power. And here's Ilia Touria with timing and placement and God-given power, and down goes Charles Dubronx. Specifically, a couple of things here. So Oliveira came out looking to kick. Front kicks to try and maintain distance. Leg kicks to try and dissuade the jab. Here's the thing about leg kicks and jabs. This is one of those weird things that I'm going to say and it's not going to sound right. But it's a little bit like the old adage that you box a brawler and brawl a boxer. If you're worried about somebody's jab, you leg kick them. One of the counters to that, though, is if you're worried about somebody's leg kicks, jab them. That sounds weird, because that all sounds contradictory till you understand how to implement it. There's something in, American Kenpo is a similar thing. We talk about, lines beat circles and circles beat lines. What do you mean? That just cancels each other. No, it's about how you implement it. What are you worried about? You worried about this big arcing punch? You go on a straight line, you get there first. You worried about this straight line? You create an angle, you create a circle, you avoid it. So if you're worried about somebody's leg kicks, if you can step deep when someone's throwing the leg kick, throw a good stiff jab in their face, it'll off balance them because getting kicked on one leg, getting punched when you're on one leg sucks. So there's a little bit of a dance that goes on there about timing and implementation rather than this isn't rock paper scissors. Right? Leg kick, it's not like a leg kicks beat jabs. No. Implementation of leg kicks will break down jabbers. Implementation of a good jab will dissuade a leg kick or two. It's about how you use it. And so both of those guys came out and kind of seemed like that was one of the points of tension. Touria got the better of it. Because Oliveira didn't like being hit on one leg. It's not fun. And it's dangerous against a guy like Touria to be out of position like that. Didn't mean he stopped throwing leg kicks. This was a short fight, mind you. He didn't completely stop throwing them, but he did not throw them as much. And similar stuff with front kicks. People in MMA are figuring out how to deal with front kicks. That's mostly about the angle. A good front kick, if you're on a line, will mess you up. But if you're circling, got some angle work going with your footwork, you can get off to the side of a front kick, they miss, and you can get a good counterattack angle off of a front kick. Especially if you read that it's coming. So Touria started to get some of that going. Then they tie up Touporia's size at lightweight is going to be a problem for him at some point because his technique in the clinch is pretty good. But Oliveira's also kind of a big lightweight at this point. Oliveira wound up pulling guard. He was really it wasn't really pulling guard, but he was trying to get a body lock takedown. And most of Oliveira's takedowns at this point are clinch takedowns. Thing is, if you overcommit to those, you do wind up on your back. You hip in too hard, you can get kind of tipped over. Or very easily redirected. And that's what Touria did. We got a little decent groundwork. Some okay ground and pound from Touria. Oliveira wound up getting really what was surprising. Not surprising. A little surprising. Oliveira started to do what he always does when he plays guard. And Touria was very, very ready for it. He passed very quickly when Oliveira was like, I'm maybe going to threaten this triangle choke here. Look, my guard's coming up high. And Touria just went, okay. Yoop. Slept around, side control, got to the mounted crucifix for a minute or two. A minute or two is an exaggeration, but dropped some stuff. Then Oliveira is able to sort of get into a leg attack. Touria still hits him a couple of times and then scrambles out. There's never really a close leg attack from Oliveira, but if you're in a real bad spot, a leg entanglement like that forces motion. Get up. Is kind of how that wound up playing out. But back on the feet, big problem for Oliveira. He's used to guys not standing and fighting him. The bulk of Oliveira's success when his run to the belt and title defenses, he just goes forward. He is offensive oriented. And he's used to guys giving way, giving ground to him. And that builds habits. Not all of them are bad, but habits can be exploited. He also likes to get back when he gets hit, which is not a bad instinct also, mind you. So Topuria jabs the body, circles, jabs him in the face, circles. Oliveira presses forward like, okay, you hit me, I have to get it back. He's used to guys not standing there in front of him. So when Topuria takes half a step back, and a little bit to the side, Oliveira's instinct and habit is forward on the line. Well, that leaves you a little bit open. And Topuria meets him with this straight, crushing right hand. The left hook that follows is unnecessary. I'm not mad at him about it. I'm going to yell at Gregory Rodriguez later. The left hand that follows is perfunctory. He's already out and then he just flops. Once again, man, footwork, timing, shot selection, the delivery system is what matters so much more than the raw power. The weapon that can't land might as well not exist. The weapon that can land devastates. And when the weapon that can land is super destructive, it ends things. Francis Ngannou had this problem. He kind of got around it because heavyweight sucks. But Francis Ngannou has like the death touch. He can just end you very quickly when he lands. But if you look at a lot of his early fights, his delivery system is not good. Like, really not good. He just kind of gets away with it because he fights a bunch of guys who don't know how to exploit that. And when inevitably they make big mistakes, he finds something. And then, of course, he got a little bit better as well as time went on. But early stuff with Francis, that delivery system is not good. It's why his boxing career was short-lived and ended in, I shouldn't even say ended, he might still go back to it, but had a disastrous prior, like last fight. Joshua messed him up. He did not find much success against Tyson Fury, partially because Tyson Fury treated that like a sparring session. And because in boxing, you think the delivery system is important in MMA? MMA has chaos. MMA has exponentially large variables. Boxing, your delivery system is everything. It does not matter how hard you hit in boxing because your delivery system has to be key. Some of the hardest punchers in the history of boxing never really achieved great things. Ernie Shavers, maybe the hardest puncher ever. Him and like George Foreman are kind of the guys. There's a few guys from that era. But I say Ernie Shavers in particular because he's largely acknowledged being one of those guys who hits you so hard your ancestors feel it. And never really winning a major world title, not because he didn't have the power, but because his actual boxing, the delivery mechanism, wasn't quite on par. George Foreman, for as awkward as he looked, developed a really, really good delivery system for bone-crushing power. Francis Ngannou's delivery system, it got better over time, but Topuria's is maybe the best. Look, Conor McGregor had great timing, but if you look at like all the times he tries to strike sort of on his own terms, it's a little bit awkward. He's frequently out over his feet, shoulders a little bit square, like it's not great mechanically. When he can like time you and get you walking into stuff and get you moving, that's when he did really good work because his vision and his timing was so good. Topuria has good vision. He has very good timing, but he can get you going forward or draw you into something. It's a big, big distinction. I mean, he just beat two of the best movers and technical fighters in Volkanovski and Holloway. Now he beat one of the most aggressive guys in Charles Oliveira. he's got a delivery system, footwork, selection, and all of which is exacerbated by having incredible punching power. Oof. I don't know exactly where we're going next with him. There's a few options. They brought Paddy Pimblett into the cage, and I'm not interested in that fight, but I am in the extreme minority, and I am very well aware of it. Dana White wasn't happy that Paddy got in the cage. At least that's what he claims. So, not sure how that happened. If Dana White didn't want that to happen, it wouldn't have happened. So either he didn't express that, he's sort of removed from the chain of command or the way things are done nowadays, or, a lot of how he prefers things be done like that don't matter anymore because he's kind of on the way out. Don't know, but could be. You've got Justin Gaethje, you've got Arman Tsarukyan. Here's the big one, man. I don't know if Islam Makhachev is going to come back to lightweight. We've got to see what happens with him and Jack Della Maddalena. If he wins the welterweight belt, boy, does he have work to do, because welterweight's really good. It's in a really good place, really healthy division. Got to spend time there. But Islam Makhachev and Ilia Touria, how do you not want to see that? Man, how do you not want to see that? So, your new lightweight champion, Ilia Touria, probably should be atop the pound-for-pound list at this point. Skill for skill, he's probably the best. His striking's miles better than Islam Makhachev's. But, I don't know. You can argue about that one if you feel so inclined. Good win for Touria, man. He's special. He is really, really a special fighter. All right, that's been a while talking about that. Co-main event. Speaking of pound for pound and guys who should be ranked higher, Alexandre Pantoja chokes out Kai Kara-France 155 of the third. Never gave KKF a chance to breathe. Pantoja comes out, gets right in his face, forward pressure. Kind of not the cleanest punching technique, but punches him back to the fence, gets the back, gets the body triangle. He did that in like less than a minute. Gets the whole first round. Second round, slows a little bit. Pantoja's figured out a little bit better, I think, how to modulate his gas. It's normally the fourth round that he just punts. Like, just tries to get through it and then comes back in the fifth. End of the second, he seemed to be slowing a bit. And just like, okay, not worth a tremendous amount of energy expenditure here. I've got the round already. I don't need to go crazy. Third round, is able to kind of, again, get... is that the one we off-balances him on a kick? He landed some nice kicks. Gets towards the back. This time he's able to get the choke. Really good stuff. A couple other minor notes on Pantoja. His jiu-jitsu is really good. He's one of the few guys in the sport using crab rides. So he gets to the back and then he'll kind of just try to kick out one of your legs, and then while you can't base, sit. He'll just pull you both down to the mat, and it's a crab ride because you've kind of got butterfly hooks from the back instead of hooks going in around the hips. You've got like your shins against the back of their thighs. Normally you do that. The phrase crab ride comes from amateur wrestling, where you get that position, but they're down in like referee's position. It's a different kind of ride from there instead of all the different kinds of amateur wrestling rides. But here, it's the same body position. You're just oriented. Instead of the guy being ridden being oriented on their hands and knees, they're oriented on their seat or more towards their back, at which point you get the hooks in. Really strong position for MMA. once again, we had a lot of the, to get out of the body triangle, you got to put the lock on the mat. Like, guys, that's so outdated. It's so outdated. It's not how you do it. I've said this before, like, that's sort of the equivalent of going, well, if you cross your feet when you put hooks in, there's an ankle lock there. It's not wrong, but like, oh no, you can catch white belts with it. Yeah, that's true. So a world champion shouldn't do it. No, a world champion shouldn't do something that makes them lose. Did he get ankle locked by that? Well, no. Did he choke the other guy out? Well, yes. Then shut up. Like, your niche, gimmicky stuff like that, you got to be aware of it. You can't be stupid. But look, Dricus du Plessis choked out Israel Adesanya with his ankles crossed. I'm sorry, are we going to disqualify that because you're not supposed to do it that way? Be aware of the risk. Yes, be aware of the risk. Oh no, they put the lock on the ground. That puts a little bit of strain on the ankle. Yeah. Not quite this it's not quite as comfortable as going the other direction, but well, are you going to tap out? No. Well then, what good is it? It can actually be more detrimental because the big thing you want to do to attack the body triangle, whatever side the lock is on, so they've got the leg across your body and then the other leg, call it the hinge leg, right? The one that has the knee going over. You want to get your leg on that same side, under their leg, and then you leverage it up. So you're trying to use your leg to straighten the leg that is hinging to complete the body triangle. Once that's not keeping the other leg securely in place, you can kind of attack that because you want that foot to be pinched between your calf and your thigh in kind of the crook of your knee. Straightening out the leg that is supposed to be securing the triangle across the body is what allows you to get some mobility there and allows you to attack the lock. If you put that side on the ground, if their hinge leg, the leverage leg, would that be the lever? No, the other one would be the lever, I think. That'd be the base. It's late. Don't me remember all this stuff. Point being, if that leg is not in a position to be attacked by your leg to adjust whether or not it's bent and is keeping the zip tie in place, so to speak, you haven't done much of anything. And if you lean to that side of it too aggressively, you're going to get bellied down. And that's real bad for a lot of reasons. So Pantoja's doing some really good stuff. Man, Pantoja is the second best flyweight in UFC history, and I don't think he passed Demetrius Johnson and Davison Figueiredo here for most finishes in flyweight history. He's also got the most submissions now in flyweight history. He's got 4 title defenses. I don't think he's ever going to catch Demetrius Johnson's title defense record, but he's so clearly better than Moreno or Figueiredo or Cejudo in terms of divisional success at this point that his only point of comparison anymore is Demetrius Johnson, which is a wild achievement. Even getting to that point is something I'm not sure. Look, a lot of us thought no one would ever get towards Anderson Silva's record. Some of the stuff is made to be broken. Some of it's untouchable because of structural differences. Saw some weird stat about that related to Cy Young. Because that's the baseball. Let me see if I can find that actually, because it speaks to this point a little bit. I don't know if I'll be able to locate it or not. Let me see if this might. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so Cy Young, over the course of his entire career, completed 749 games. That's pitching from start to finish. For reference, there have been 769 complete games by every starting pitcher combined in Major League Baseball since 2013. Yeah, no, it's just not structurally possible at this point, I think, to touch what Cy Young did. Baseball is just different at this point. And there might so some of these records might become more touchable depending on like some structural changes the UFC might undergo is sort of the long rambling point there. But Pantoja's put himself in that position. He said, I think I should be only behind Islam Makhachev. If I were to do the pound for pound rankings, I haven't turned in a rankings in forever, but hypothetically, my top five at this point would be Touria, Makhachev, Pantoja. Who would be four? Because I think right now four is like Magomed Ankalaev, and we all laugh. The pound for pound rankings are just like the top two are maybe correct, and then after that it's who's coming up in the schedule. I might go DDP for. God, he's goofy, but you can't argue success. I would probably go DDP and then JDM. Because that would probably be how I would have the top five right now. I'd have to really think. I'd have to go through a longer look to figure out my like full top 15. I do Marab. No, no, no. Part of the problem is pound for pound gets confused with like it's supposed to just represent skill for skill, and it winds up representing like modern contemporary resume. So like who's beat the best guy recently, who's got a longer winning streak, like some of that gets kind of tossed in there and it muddies the water a little bit. I don't know. Pantoja being like number 10 pound for pound though was flat out comically inept. He's real good. He does have a next fight lined up in theory because Joshua Van. We'll talk about his fight in a minute. But there had been a like point of discussion like with Manel Kape's foot being broken. Do we need a third fight between Pantoja and Brandon Royval, or would Pantoja think about moving up at least for one fight to fight Merab at bantamweight because what is there at flyweight? And the injury to Kape kind of muddied that because if Kape had beaten Royval, Manel Kape is clearly the next guy. And actually, I know that's a rematch, but their first fight was actually competitive. Most people don't remember it because it wasn't super exciting, but at this point, man, like that's a good fight. We kind of got saved by Joshua Van showing up and doing what he did. They brought Van into the cage after the fact. They had a very respectful stare down. Yeah, that's a good fight. Flyweight, man, a little bit of spark of life to it. Finally, good. So let's talk about that for just a second. Next, Joshua Van defeats Brandon Royval via unanimous decision, 229-28 and a 30-27. First round, Royval throws a lot of busy work that doesn't land, and he starts eating some counters from Van. Second round, Royval picks a few better shots and starts extending his combinations. So he does a little bit better. Still gets punched in the face a lot, but enough to win the round to my estimation. Third round, Van has kind of figured out the timing on Royval's entries, and every time Royval goes to enter, he starts side kicking him in the knee. Really, really well positioned, really smart read from Van, because it sort of arrests Royval's momentum. It knocks him over a couple of times. And then right near the end of the fight, he clocks him with a right hand and drops him. This was fight of the night. This might be fight of the year. This was great. This was wild action from start to finish. This set, like, what was the record this set? Hang on. Yeah, Joshua Van, by the way, graduated high school right before the pandemic. Was born after 9/11. If you want to feel old, and it does make me feel old, believe it or not. Hang on. Where is that thing from? Because I think it was Aaron Bronstetter who had the stat. Yeah, here it is. So between the two of them, they set records. Brandon Royval attempted 467 significant strikes over the 3 rounds. That's attempting one strike every 1.9 seconds. Try to keep that pace on a heavy bag for 5 rounds. I dare you. That's murderous. He set a record for the most significant strikes attempted in a 3-round fight in UFC history, and that's technically a higher output per round than the beating Max Holloway put on Calvin Kattar that we all dropped our jaws at. Now that was 5 rounds, and it stands alone at the top of that list. But some of these records, again, man, we think they're untouchable. If this had been 5 rounds, he might have thrown more. I don't think he would have landed more, but yeah, these two combined for just some stupid numbers. God bless them, too. Like, Royval threw 467. Not like Van was some scrub. He threw 305. The difference is accuracy. Royval's accuracy was only 46%. Van's was 66%. Both did mostly headhunting. A little bit of body work from Van when they got towards the clinch. But this was great. Look this fight up if you did not see it. This was great. This was a good time had by all. So now we're looking at Van and Pantoja. Van's young. I think the big problem he's going to run into is his defense is not that good. I mentioned, you might look at that and go, well, Royval only landed 40% of the time. Van absorbs like 5 significant strikes a minute. That's very high. That's unsustainably high on the face of it. So we'll see. He's going to get all the smoke, as the kids say. But great fight. Man, if that had been 5 rounds, because those two guys by the end of it looked like they still could have gone 2 more rounds. I mean, Royval got dropped, but he recovered fairly quickly. 2 more rounds of that would have been utter insanity. Would have been great. Next up, Beneil Dariush defeats Renato Moicano via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. Dariush does some pretty good work throughout the first round. Inside leg kicks, body kicks. His leg kicks bothered Moicano. He landed enough inside leg kicks that Moicano showed southpaw, then he got calf kicked a few times. Then Dariush started stepping deep enough to kick the back leg. This wasn't quite... So Rob Kamen got kind of famous in kickboxing for kicking across both thighs. This wasn't quite that because he rarely caught any of the front leg. Moicano stands a little bit too wide for that. But if the inside leg kick has landed enough, when they lift that leg to try and check or mitigate it, even turn it in, if you step a little deeper and you kick, they'll not be ready and braced for the kick to the back leg. Those leg kicks to the back leg are real nasty, frequently because your back leg isn't conditioned the same way your lead leg is. But Dariush gets dropped near the end of the round. He recovers fairly quickly, but it's enough to lose him the round. Second round, he just gets right after it. Moicano starts slowing down Dariush. Forward pressure, some pretty decent left hands. Then Moicano tries to force the wrestling, gets tipped over, and Dariush on top is just better. Kind of the same thing in the third round. Good enough little fight. Peyton Talbot righted the ship, defeating Felipe Lima via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. Lima has good offense, but it's disconnected, and he doesn't have a lot of ideas. He's got a handful of ideas, but they don't harmonize. And he's young, it's kind of to be expected. Lima also had the idea that he could out-wrestle Talbot, and no, he couldn't. Talbot's ground and pound actually looked pretty good, so good win for him, getting things back on track. That was your main card. On the prelims, Gregory Rodriguez knocks out Jack Hermanson, 4:21 of the first. Nice lunging left hook. Just finally timed it well enough to catch Hermanson. Then hits a hammer fist after the fact that was deeply unnecessary. Not cool, RoboCop. Featherweight next, Jose Miguel Delgado knocked out Haider Emil 26 seconds into the first round. These two got after it right away. Then Delgado just kind of gets Emil backing up, grabs a collar tie, waits half a second, knee comes up the middle right to the chin, hits him with an elbow on the way down. Emil was unhappy with the stoppage, but it was very fair. He was done. So good win for Delgado. Tracy Cortez defeated Viviane Araújo in a typical fight for both Tracy Cortez and Viviane Araújo. Terrence McKinney chokes out Vyacheslav Borshov. Poor Slava Claus. He's got the hat that says Slava Claus on it, and he was sad wearing the hat. And sad Santa's just sad. Mounted guillotine choke for McKinney, 55 seconds of the first round. So Borshov throws a leg kick, gets tipped over. McKinney gets on top, they scramble, gets to a front headlock, locks up an anaconda, transitions towards the mount. Doesn't get credit to Terrence McKinney here. A lot of guys get too caught up over going for a specific grip when they go for this choke. Whether that's the anaconda or the darce, you have to be able to read the body position, know which one will actually benefit the position you're in, and then work through that, because a lot of guys overcommit to one or the other and then gas their arms out when they're not quite in finishing position. McKinney smart enough to switch towards the guillotine, moves to full mount. He doesn't even have it ideally locked up, because in an ideal situation, Slava Claus would have been sleeping before he tapped. But he's got enough horsepower and he's got the right position. His mount is high enough that he's not on the hips. So Borshov just has nothing to buck with, nothing to leverage. He's just positionally screwed, to say nothing of being strangled. So good one for McKinney. On the early prelims, Jacoby Smith gassed himself out a little bit in the first and then still got a choke on Nico Price in the second. Then utterly wasted his post-fight interview, kind of just screaming Joe Rogan repeatedly. Look, Jacoby Smith was the biggest favorite in UFC history. Came back down to earth a little bit here. There's still work to do. Not surprising, he's young in his career. Him being green is to be expected. He's with a good camp. Hopefully he gets that ironed out. Let's just not be silly about him. He's got work to do. And kicking everything off, we had a crappy heavyweight fight between Janata Janiz and Alvin Hines. I give Hines credit. He got busted up the first two rounds. But Janiz kind of slowed and gassed out in the third, and Hines made a fight of it. Look, it wasn't great. So bonuses, fight of the night, easy call to Van and Royval. Performances for Touria and Rodriguez. Terrence McKinney. Fun fact about Terrence McKinney, if you don't mind. In the UFC, he has his UFC debut, a 7-second knockout of Matt Frevola. He followed that up with a first-round rear naked choke win over Fares Ziam. He loses to Drew Dober. He submits Eric Gonzalez. He loses to Bonfim. He loses to Sadikov. He then stops Mike Breeden in the first round. He stops Brandon Marat in the first round. He loses to Esteban Rabovics. He then knocks out Damir Hadzovic in the first round. Here, mounted guillotine, chokes out Vyacheslav Borshov in the first round. Want to know something funny about Terrence McKinney? Despite all those first-round finishes, no bonuses. That man cannot catch a break. A few of those he probably should have had, too, by the way. I would have given it to him over Rodriguez, personally. Would have given it to Pantoja over Rodriguez. But, you know, that's me, and I'm not the one in charge of that. Really good card. Over-delivered. Somebody mentioned this, and I'm going to quote them. I want to find the actual tweet here. Give me just a sec. Where are you? Not that. No, not that. There we are. Okay. This is from Dan Tom. So, Dan Tom MMA. Only 2 fights above 170 pounds all night. Your heavyweight slop fest was the curtain jerker like it should be, and the entire main card was lightweight or lower. And all this resulted in a very entertaining night. Maybe card formatting and quality are important. And maybe the lighter weight divisions deserve more respect. He is entirely correct. The obsession with sticking crappy heavyweights in main events, looking at you, Lewis, and Teixeira, and populating big stretches with, here's a middleweight, here's a light heavyweight, here's another middleweight, here's a heavyweight, here's another light heavyweight. Most of those fighters in most of those divisions aren't good. I know middleweight's catching a little bit of a stray there. I apologize, I like middleweight, but the lower end of that division just is what it is. Yeah. You're completely correct. This was actually a well-constructed card. And look what happened when we weren't just on autopilot with the algorithm going, heavyweight, main event. That's better than flyweight main event. Well, yeah. So, that's it. Full report, MMA Zone of 411mania.com. I think you can find the full fight between Touria and Oliveira on the UFC's YouTube channel. It's already got like 7 million views. I know they have at least the finish. I think they have the whole fight because it was 2.5 minutes. So if you missed that one, go rewatch it. It's a short watch and you can do so completely free and legal. Easy event of the year so far. I don't have that as one of my year-end awards, but man, what a very, very necessary, exciting event that actually delivered on the back of 2 events in a row that just were dull, and like a whole year plus, almost 18 months worth of UFC matchmaking philosophy and content generation that has been the doldrums. Shining example of what is entertaining and compelling and interesting about this godforsaken spectacle we call a sport. So, my hat's off to everybody involved. Thank y'all very much. And thank you for continuing to listen. So, let me clear that out. Even though I'm not predicting it, I may as well get this set up. Okay, that's all set now. So, you can go away. All right, let's do a couple of bits of news because I spent 90 minutes just talking about that event. So, I'll try not to be here forever. Okay. let's talk real briefly about Joe Rogan and the Liver King stuff. I want to be quick about this because I want to make another point. This is giving me an opportunity to bring up more than anything else. So the Liver King went into the jungle and did a bunch of drugs and came out and now has beef with Joe Rogan. And went to his house and it got weird and Rogan called the cops, like you should. And the people who have to try and make hay out of airtime, be that frivolous podcasters, and I am well aware I border on that. I don't think I don't know that. I do. Or comedians that do daytime radio, or DJs who are basically comedians doing longer talking segments. They all kind of had a common thing that they talked about after this. And that was, Joe Rogan, you talk a lot on your podcast about how you would wreck somebody or beat them up if you got the chance. Well, you had the chance, and why didn't you do it? Dear morons, frequently when Rogan's talking about that, there's an unconscious assumption on his part that the scenario in question is somewhat regulated. I have no doubt that if these two signed for a freak show MMA fight, Joe Rogan would beat the piss out of the Liver King. Zero doubt in my mind. But if a maniac shows up outside your house in the middle of the night screaming at you, no one's first impulse should be an opportunity to go enact violence in the street. That's deeply unsettling behavior. You call the police. This is why they exist. More importantly, the fact that Joe Rogan is a significantly more trained martial artist, both, striking and jiu-jitsu, you're going to go out and confront some guy? You don't know if he's got a gun. You don't know if he's got a knife. You know what happens if you go roll with a guy with a knife? It ain't good. I'll tell you, it's really not good. So, no. Anyone who trains seriously knows the following. This is how I know most of the people filling airtime with this are stupid and have never trained. You are deeply aware of your own shortcomings. Your ego will be flattened if you train in a good place. If you train I'm not even talking world-class training. If you train at a good martial arts school, I don't even care what your martial art is, for the most part. If you train at a good school, even an art form that we all kind of look sideways at can have benefit. Yes, even Aikido. Yes, I said it. Leave me alone about that. I'm making a point here. If you go to a good school, your ego is going to get flattened. That makes you acutely aware of your own shortcomings. In moments when things are different, your shortcomings also do kind of stick in your head. So there's that. Second, next, I forget what number I'm on at this point. Next point. Let's just delve into the hypothetical that Joe Rogan does go out there and kick the guy's head off. Do you know what happens after that? I mean this. Do you know what happens in the aftermath of a violent encounter like that? The cops show up, and there's a good chance you go to jail. Now, I can hear you screaming at me, no, that would be self-defense. Would it? Do you know what self-defense is? I mean this as well. People don't know what self-defense is. So, if you've heard me say this before, then you know what I'm going to say. If you haven't, self-defense, again, people think that self-defense is this trump card you pull out of your back pocket. I feared for my life, therefore anything I did was justified. That is not how this works. Moreover, the cops don't care for the most part. Self-defense is a legal category of violence. You cannot shoot someone, but they shot at me first and then I shot them. You still shot someone. That is an illegal act of violence. What changes is the category in which you place it. You either place it in the felonious, illegal one, or the legal subcategory of self-defense. Now, why is this an important distinction? Because the legal category of self-defense can vary depending on what state you're in. Now, this would have been in Texas, a little bit looser there. And there's a handful of things that are more or less universal about this, especially in the United States. Not as universal as it used to be. But either way, you don't get to tell the cops it was self-defense. That's you trying to make a legal argument. You have to argue that to a judge or a jury. So you still probably have to go to jail. You still probably, now again, this can change a little bit, and some of it will depend on how bad the end result is. But if you render someone unconscious, you deploy enough force, even if you choke someone out, like there's states, I know this because I live in one of these, by the way, where the application of a chokehold requires it to be a felony assault. If I just punch someone, we get into a fight, and I just punch somebody, then I get punched. We might both get charged with a couple of misdemeanors. Misdemeanor violence, misdemeanor disturbing the peace, whatever. If I choke someone, the use of a chokehold makes it felony assault. Utah is not the only state that has this rider, but I know it exists in Utah because I live here. And now, bear in mind, shooting someone is also felony assault. Felony murder if you kill them with it. Well, felony murder is actually a different category, but murder being a felony. Felony murder is a subcategory whereby any murder done with whether the murder is intentional or not, murder done in the commission of an intentional felony can get you murder one, is sort of the legal way that works. But I try real hard to know the laws of the place I live, so I know that if I choke someone, use of a chokehold means felony assault, not misdemeanor. Now, I could still try to argue that I used it in self-defense, in theory. But, once again, I'm now having to argue that the actions I took fell into a legal category. It doesn't make choking someone not a felony, if you're kind of following me here. So, somebody goes and bangs on my door right now. I'm going to call the cops. I'm not going to go out there and start rolling around on the ground with them. I don't know them. I don't know what weapons they have. Even if that goes my way and I quote-unquote win, there's still the cops that show up. There's still the fallout from acts of violence. We're supposed to live in something approximating a civilized society. That's how you should handle this. Let the professionals do it. Because there's endless complications when you try to get involved. And this runs contrary to what, and because people don't like Rogan as much anymore as they used to now, it's like, well, you know, big bad MMA guy didn't want to go out there and fight the steroid Liver King freak. Somebody probably recently high on something yells at me from my front lawn at 3 a.m. I'm not going out there either. You shouldn't. Hey, moreover, you shouldn't. I don't know how much you train, if you do at all. You might even be a police officer. If you're off duty, somebody comes yelling at your house at 3 a.m, are you going to go out there? Like, no. That's just stupid. But people trying to fill airtime. Boy, you know, Joe Rogan had the opportunity to go out there and prove all of his tough talk. Guys, unstructured violence is so different. What happens, look this up real fast if you don't believe me. Look up what happens when boxers get mad at each other in the ring and, like, fight. These are world champion, world-class boxers. What do? They don't punch. They kick. Badly. They throw kicks. Why? Because there's a thing that goes on in the brain about I'm going to ignore the structured rules in order to inflict unstructured violence. World champion boxers will not throw punches at each other when they're really mad. They wrestle and they kick. What happened? You can find these online. Those examples exist in the world of boxing. What happens when world-class jiu-jitsu practitioners get pissed at each other? They don't do jiu-jitsu. They slap the crap out of each other badly. They badly try to strike. World-class, world champion jiu-jitsu practitioners don't do jiu-jitsu. When they get really pissed at each other in those kind of heated situations, they don't do it. Why not? World champion. You'd rather just, windmill punches at each other. You can find these online too. They exist. There's boatloads of video evidence of everything I'm talking about here, if you don't believe me. It is all imminently findable. So, no. Don't go confront the maniac on your lawn at 3 in the morning. Call the cops. That's what you're supposed to do. This is an appropriate response. I'm going to go out there and do what? Nothing but make things worse. The fantasy, this is bad enough when people, put it this way, it's bad enough that people who train do this in their heads. Where, boy, in that situation, I sure would have gone out there and, no, you wouldn't, buddy. And you should know better. Second, but, it's bad enough that there are people who train to do that. When there's morons who haven't been in a real fight in 20 years or 40 years or anything outside of high school, when you start swinging and it goes on for about 10 seconds and then some teacher or janitor breaks it up and hauls you off. Those are about ego and vanity more than anything. Nothing good comes. And what good came of that, by the way? Asking you to think back. Everybody just does the hero thing in their head, man. I would have gone out and done what? And done what? I'd have gone out there and what? Broken his skull? Man, and then the cops show up, and then what? Oh, it was, self-defense. Good luck arguing that. And I know there's a few of you out there who just did I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. That is such BS. It's one of those things that sounds like a tough guy truism. Here's a thought. Don't go out onto your lawn at 3 in the morning to confront the maniac. Once again, just a thought. Ugh. And I'm just going to repeat myself. If you train a lot, you're aware of a lot of those variables. And you know what? Let me just throw this out there. Let's just say Joe Rogan had. The number of people who are kind of like laughing at him for not using his training, if he'd gone out there and really hurt that guy, just hypothetically, you'd all be killing him right now for being a trained fighter, not a fighter, but a trained martial artist, beating up a steroid freak who needs help. You would be saying, why didn't he call the cops? There's no winning with some of this stuff. Anyway, that was just an excuse for me to yell about the state of the world a little bit there, and to remind everyone, self-defense is not a thing that you can just kind of jump up and down and point at yourself. See, self-defense, it is a legal argument. It is a legal category of violence. And That's not always readily apparent, and it frequently has to be a legal argument made in a legal setting. So you have to pay your lawyer, then you have to make the case to a judge and potentially a jury. That's ugh, that's complicated and that's messy. And we have systems and professions in place designed to try and stop us from having to go down that messy route. So let's all try to be a little bit more civilized to each other, yeah? All right. Yeah, to wrap up here. Man, this is a rough one. So, a health update on Ben Askren. Did I talk about this when the news broke? I'll recap if I didn't. So, Ben Askren wound up in the hospital, very serious condition. He got a staph infection. I think that transition, so he got a staph infection. I think he got pneumonia, something similar. Went into the hospital, wound up turning septic. Was in a real bad spot for a little bit. He seems to be a little bit better now. But now he's on the lung transplant list. So that's why I think pneumonia came in, but that's also not uncommon with like bad septic infections. There's so much fluid that builds up in the body, it's got to go somewhere. So anything you can do in terms of, I think there's a GoFundMe set up for this, because naturally his health insurance is being I do not like state-run medicine. It leads to some of the stuff that's going on in Canada right now, and that's yeesh. I am more than happy to equally point out that the healthcare provider system that we have set up here in the United States is, wow, just bad. There's a lot about the healthcare in the United States that I prefer. Seriously. There's a lot about the healthcare in the United States that the entire world prefers. It's why they come here for so much of it. Not all of it, but a lot. We have the best cancer treatment in the world here, among other things. But insurance, man. Especially once we were mandated to buy it. Thanks for that, government. Ugh. So I think there's one of those set up. If you don't have that or you don't want to donate to that, just keeping his family in your prayers would be deeply appreciated. Hope he pulls through. He's got a family. And, you know, whatever you think about him kind of being a goofy guy. Way too young to go out. So let this also be a bit of a reminder to all of us that train. Shower thoroughly after. And if you own a place, make sure you clean the mats. And look, if you train and you know that mat cleaning is a bit of an issue, volunteer to help clean the mats. Try to keep everybody as healthy as possible. Training like that is unhygienic to begin with. There's no getting around it. There's stuff we can do to minimize it. So let's all minimize it. And guys who train a lot, Demetrius Johnson never had a staph infection. There's stuff you can do. Please, let's all do that. Make that all a little bit better. And hopefully Ben Askren gets the lung transplant he needs, because that's kind of my hope for everybody in that position. All right. That, I've been gone on way too long about some of this stuff. Okay. I'm going to check the old social medias. If there's nothing new combat sports related, we will do plugs and get out of here. Okay, nope, nothing there. So, plugs. Monday, later than usual, but Monday we will have Damn You Hollywood. This time it will be Mark, myself, I think Jason will be joining us. Yeah. So the three of us will get together and we will review Megan 2.0, which is bombing hard. Would not have been my choice of the movies this weekend. I actually think I would have preferred F1, but F1 didn't get a release date for a while, and then by the time the schedule had been kind of put out, Jason said he wanted to talk Megan, and rather than just throw all that out the window for F1, damn you, Hollywood has a way of, on pretty much any given weekend where the options are an interesting film that's going to perform well or something that's going to bomb and we're going to wind up regretting, we will choose the second option more often than not. So tune in for that. WWE SmackDown on Friday. No UFC event on Saturday, so there's that. Next week we will be back here to preview UFC on ESPN 70, which is not good. And yeah, that's what I got for the week. So thank you very much for listening. As always, I appreciate the heck out of you. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.